thinking about our potential issues, what actual issues are experienced whilst doing the research, reflections whilst doing the research, procedural analytic decision making, and importantly, about your codes, categories as you start to develop your theory. And I think this thing of beginning from the beginning to the end, and this idea that we need to write or document what we're doing, these sparks that are happening, are really quite important to thinking about what makes a memo. Because a memo doesn't have to be just words. Now, back in Glazer's day, it was pre-technology, so the medium was writing your memos down. But now we've got word, we can write, we can use odd words, we can bring sentences, but we've got access to voice recorders. So, when you're sitting on the bus and that moment of spark occurs, then this is when you start to secretly whisper into your phone or device of some kind. And that will capture what you're thinking at any one time. We can use diagrams, we can use illustrations, we can use photographs as artifacts as we go on collecting data. Now, we will always need to think about the ethics of collecting or taking photos as we go along. And indeed, that's something I did with some of my research when participants were showing me things. So they would show me, for example, a photograph journal that they made of the recovery process of a certain kind of illness. And I asked permission if I could take photos of that photographic journal, because it very much called that individual's process from injury through to healing. But within that, I had to remove any kind of identity. But so we always need to think about what the ethics are along the way. Other artifacts we might collect along the way: documents, policies, posters, things you find lying around, because all is data. We are all data. Raw data is a memo. We might want to capture a certain quotation or a group of quotations from data and pop them together just to play with and see what it's trying to tell us. Our field notes are memos. And that's an interesting thing, because field notes and memos are quite often used interchangeably, but there is a subtle difference between the two, because a field note is collected when you're in the field of collecting that data. And a memo can be about that as well, but a memo will be thinking about what you're learning, what you're thinking about, what you're ruminating from that field note. So I collected field notes in relation to the buildings where I collected data from. I collected field notes on whether someone's office door was left open and shut, and they led to sort of memos whilst I was looking at those things in relation to the data and the transcripts of what people were telling me. So I was able to almost interrelate field notes and memos together, but the memo was very much about uncovering layers within what was in the data. We can memo about our earlier memos. That's great fun, because then we can go back to 6 months ago or a year ago and think, what on earth was I thinking then? Alternatively, it's wow, how has my thinking developed, and why has my thinking developed? And that's the important part. And of course, we can memo about what we do next. I might like to do this, I might like to explore this, I think I need to dig into this a bit more detail, maybe I need to ask questions more about this as we go along. And that's really important for that coding and constant comparison in your early stages of doing your data collection. How long are they useful for? Well, they remain as useful for as long as you need them to remain useful. And don't be afraid to remove the non-useful ones away, the ones you've kind of finished and done, and something like that. I've completed that bit, I've moved on from that kind of thing. But always be clear as well that closing too soon can reduce your analytical pathway and can fracture that process of understanding from how you got from A to B. Think about how you document them sensibly. Label them, tag them, date them, title them, make them work for you. And if you're the kind of person that has like post-it notes here and voice notes here and something else scribbled over here, that can be really important. Alternatively, you could be a lot more organized and always carry something with you. Like you could have maybe a OneNote on your phone, or some end note type thing where you could speak and make type notes in at the same time as well. But importantly, how can you make those memos work for you by tagging them? Because in a year's time, you'll think, oh, I knew I wrote something about that, but I can't remember the word I used to tag it. So that's sensible thinking forward. And again, that always enhances your transparency and credibility for how you did your research. And that is what you're ultimately always trying to demonstrate in the long run. How is my research done with credibility as a researcher? What integrity have I demonstrated and shown to this research process? Memos are a means of doing that. That's all I'm going to say about memos, because we've got some super exciting examples about memos to show instead. And then maybe once we've seen them, we can have a conversation.
Thank you so much, Hilary. So open to the floor. Are there any questions for Hilary? No? I've got one, Hilary. What's the difference, it's not a joke, between a memo and a field note?
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Apologies, did I miss something there?
Yeah, you did.
Sorry, sorry, I hit leave instead of stop sharing.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
So firstly, can I check that I've stopped sharing?
Yes, you have. You have.
There we go. I'm going to step away from the buttons.
You do that. I had a question, which was, what is the difference between a memo and a field note?
Okay. So for me, a field note is something that's captured about the environment within which you're capturing the data. Okay. A memo is something I'm thinking about in relation to that field note. So an example that I could give was, in a building, busy foyer, big old-fashioned building, full of people, and yet my research participant that I was arranging to meet came up to me and said, "Hello, Hilary," and shook my hand. And I thought, how on earth does that person know who I am? Okay, that was a field note for me, because it was like something happened there. Okay, and I thought it's just interesting, and I remember speaking it, thinking, wow, I don't know if it means anything or not, but it meant something. Okay. And then later on, I noted something that with this particular participant in their office, we shut the office door. And I made a note that that mental field note about the office door being shut. But during the interview itself, we were talking about an open office door and how people can come in and out. And I made a memo about that. And somehow that discussion about I have an open office and people can come in and out, whilst having a field note of a shut door and a big office building foyer, just somehow said something different to me. And I would have lost a layer of contextuality if I hadn't made the field note about the experience and a memo of thinking about those field notes from the data I collected, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So they can run concurrently.
They can, and I don't actually think there's a hard and fast rule between the two. But the important thing is what you do with them, I think. And the memoing is that what you're doing with something, whereas a field note I could just leave lying there, as in I could describe the building that was busy and then I could just leave it there, kind of thing. But I wasn't thinking about it in any further detail.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Anyone else have any other questions? No, I think the bit for me that I picked up on was that is how you record it so that you know that you can go back to it, and also being prepared to record a memo at any particular point, like the shower or the drive or the dog walk.
And do you know what?
When you're least expecting it, it'll crop up in your mind.
Yeah, and so many times that, you know, especially when it comes to building that explanatory theory thing, quite often that will happen at the most inappropriate time. And so it is a case of being, stop what I'm doing and how can I grab something to record this. Now, if you're in the shower, not quite so easy. But I know other cases where people have just stopped what they're doing, they stopped driving. In Nicky's case, he stopped his bike ride. Look, you know, that thing of I've got it. I have to somehow capture this in some sense somehow. That's when we've got to get creative about it, and it can be a scribble. And in my case, my writing is always a scribble, so that's
fantastic. Hilary, thank you so much. It was a great start to the session today. Right, so that takes us on to our three speakers who are going to talk us through that practical application, what it was like for them as grounded theorists in the field. So we'll move first to Nicky, who's going to talk us through the Glazerian approach to his memoing experience. Over to you, Nicky.
Thank you. Hopefully everyone's looking at some sort of title slide. There's not many, I promise. There's a couple, just because I want to show some examples, but hopefully everyone can see this okay. Right, so although I'm always sold as a Glazerian grounded theorist because I'm in the minority in a group of constructivist people, and I get teased for it. I think the key thing for me is to just today, I want to just highlight how my memoing practice evolved whilst I could argue that it stayed methodologically congruent. And I really struggled with this at first, particularly because I was well aware that come Viva and come thesis write-up, I had to convince someone that what I did was okay. So early stages, and I wish, and I can only hammer this home as much as I can to everyone I talk to, I wish I started memoing a lot earlier. I started memoing when I started, I guess when I started my first interview, and I wish I would have done it all the way through the design of a project, etc., because it would have made life a bit easier. But that aside, at first, I was a good little grounded theorist, and I did what everyone told me to do, which is you write memos. And then I wrote things like this. And this was a memo that came after my first interview or second interview, something along these lines. And I wrote things down. And that was fine. And I did that for a couple of interviews and a couple of thought sessions and some thinking around it. But as a scientist, my brain doesn't work this way. I can't read because I get distracted. And in my normal day-to-day practice as a lecturer in bioscience, I scribble and I draw and I make diagrams and I talk to myself because I'm a bit weird. And I really struggled with putting stuff on paper. And at one point I was dictating memos to my phone, but then it really struggles with having a foreign accent. It can't cope. So that was a very good option. So I had some ideas around how I could make this work for me, but then I had to figure out, okay, so now what? So I went back to the literature and with the Glazerian background, I thought, right, I best start with Glaser because why not? And I stumbled on a thing in a relatively recent piece of writing from Glaser, where it said there is no prescribed way to memo. And as soon as I read that, I thought, but why in the world is everyone writing memos then? If there's no prescribed way to memo, why is everyone writing them? Because he specifically says in that same paper, a quick jot down of an idea to a page-length memo on analytical issues. Well, great. So that doesn't matter. But then further in that same piece of work, it also argues that memos are written pieces of text, preferably handwritten in a notebook. Now, I would argue this is where Glaser shows his age, because no. But then that seems a contradictory thing, because on the one hand, you said there is no prescribed way to memo, but you have to do it in writing. So, well, that contradicts each other, and I wasn't okay with that. Because early on in his issues in Grounded Theory book in 98, Glaser also says that rigidity in memoing impedes contextualization. And then he's the one introducing the rigidity. So I had a bit of an internal argument, and then not being one to not create waves, I thought, okay, well, let's just ignore the fact that it needs to be written, and let's see what are the characteristics that are important for a memo. And actually, the medium or the format of the memo doesn't matter. It is your ability to sort it and code it and incorporate it in your research. How you memo doesn't matter as long as you can process it. So having done that and having had some thinking around this, I decided that I could do whatever I want as long as I could sort it. So Hilary was right. I was riding to work and I was deep in thought, which is not really what you're supposed to be doing while you're riding a bike. But luckily, this happened on a country lane somewhere in the back of Essex. And I suddenly had this thought flare up. I was like, oh, God, I get it now. I know what's happening here. So I quickly grabbed my phone, spoke a few words, continued, because I was on my way to work and I had a lecture to deliver. So I had to actually I was speaking to my phone, did it all there. And then as soon as I had the chance, I listened back to that. And then I started to do some more thinking, and I came up with something like this. I thought, okay, so there is stuff happening here, but what is it that's happening? And instead of trying to write about it, I started to doodle and draw and sketch, because in my brain works that way. And I can still sort this because there are still patterns to pick up here. Hence the color coding. There were things that were the same. There were things that I could group, and doing this on, I mean, I do this on an iPad. I could just pick stuff up and move it about and scribble it without issue. And this really worked. And then the more I started to memo and think about what was happening in my data, this particular memo then became this memo, a lot more formal, but still very analytical. Still, okay, so there are things happening, there are things that interplay. I've got explanations around here with the green dotted lines. There are things that are happening, and I could start to see the patterns in my data, and I could analyze this. And to me, this visual way of working was a lot better than writing things down, because this was more flexible. I can write, yeah, of course you can scribble around it, but this was more flexible. This didn't force me to adhere to a piece of text on paper. I used the dictation function on my phone and on my voice recorder a lot because I like to talk to myself, and that makes life a lot easier than trying to force myself to write it. And then I got to thinking, so I'm dictating these notes to myself, and then I'm writing them down after I've dictated them. But why am I doing that? Why am I writing down what I've said? It's double work. So I used this, as I said, the speech to text, but didn't work because foreign accents are a problem. So that didn't quite happen. So, but why am I bothering putting this in written form? Just because that's the common accepted norm. So let's push back a bit. And then I came up with this, maybe I just need to leave it as voice recordings. Because why not? The medium doesn't matter. And in the end, I ended up including voice recordings in my thesis, where the people reading it can simply scan the QR code, and whatever device you're scanning it with will then start playing the memo. And I just dotted them in my thesis like this. And it worked. Turns out my external examiner ended up listening to these on the sofa with a cold drink. And it was apparently quite an immersive experience. I find it weird because it's I can't listen to myself. It's quite awkward and off-putting. But apparently it was a really immersive experience to listen to me talk about my thoughts and things that are going on. So it was very much the evolving matter of starting with that everyone does it this way, so I need to do it as well, to no, actually, you do it the way that works for you. And as long as you can sort and code and process your memos, then you are methodologically congruent. And that's what matters. And that's kind of where I am now. And that was it. That was me. And as I said, I'd like to push and find the boundaries of what people like. And I think I found it here, but at least the examiners agreed with it, and it worked really well.
Nikki, thank you so much, and also thank you for your honesty as well about memoing the first couple of interviews and then me losing that that enthusiasm or getting excited by other things and then having to come back to it.
I think it was just more frustration that memoing wasn't working for me, but it took me a while to figure out why it wasn't working. And it wasn't working because I was trying to force myself into it has to be written down on a piece of paper habit, which doesn't work for me. It's not how I teach. It's not how it works. It's not how my brain works. So why would I try and force that? So,
does anyone have any questions for Nikki? Diana.
Hi, Nikki. Hi, Pippa. Thank you. I was just curious, you said about the audio memos. Was there any feedback on your doodlegrams? Because that's very definitely, I have more of those than I do the written stuff. I was just curious whether the examiners had come back with that at all.
Other than that, they liked them, no questions. I mean, they were pretty self-explanatory because I obviously put them in the thesis and then as a couple of representative examples. And I in my methods section, or in my methods chapter, I explained what the purpose of those memos was. And because I've explained it, by the time they made it in there, I guess it made sense because they didn't ask any questions.
I wonder if the doodling, the diagramming, we'll come on to that with Janet, but I wonder if that's because we're exploring a process. We're trying to explain that a process which is perhaps more of a visual thing in our minds. I know for me, that's exactly how I feel, that I see it and I just want to doodle it, even as I'm last night reading through all these sociological theories that are just blowing my mind. And it's all words, I'm scribbling on a bit of paper and drawing arrows because I can start to see how they link together. I wonder if that's because it's a process.
I think so, because in my teaching, if I have to explain how to do a particular experiment, I scribble it on a whiteboard because it's a process. And you can do the different steps and the interlinking and all that sort of stuff. So why wouldn't we do that with memoing? And why would you then have to, once you've done that, and then you have to put it in writing, and you use hundreds of words to describe a process that you could just scribble, and it makes much more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I think that brings us on very nicely to Katrina, who's gonna. I don't have any working titles here, but I've got that you're going to talk to us about using memoing with words and drawings. So
I should have gone first because Nikki is too neat and my stuff will look really messy now. Hello everyone, I'm Katrina. I work at Anglia Ruskin in Cambridge. I work in sport. And so what I'm going to try and do in this 6-7 minutes is to explain to you my 6-year PhD. So wish me luck. So this is my PhD captured in one slide, which is sort of terrifying. But the main important thing to capture here is that I had sort of a 2-phase data collection just because of the nature of studying part-time, and how you justify that and all that kind of thing is a different context. It's really important within this slide, as you see, that memoing goes all the way down, all the way through. So that's what I'm going to concentrate on. The crazy diagram on the bottom right hand corner, that's actually my grounded theory. But I don't have time to explain that today. So I'm just going to stick with the memoing because it will get crazy. But this is it. I'm background in sport, in judo. I work with British judo. I'm looking at athletes and how they learn and how they're educated. And then I'm interested in how the national governing body was supporting them. So as Hilary mentioned earlier, I used OneNote. OneNote was brilliant for me because it enabled me to have it on my phone, on my computer, in loads of different places, and it does pictures, it does voice notes, so I can capture and everything. And for me, I might write something in my notebook because I'm a scribbler, but then I take a picture of it and put it onto the system. So it enabled me to keep everything together. And I think that in the way that I'm working at the moment, it's so important that I can have one space for everything. I had a kind of a three question remit to try and capture everything to explain to you. So the memoing, when to use it. all the time, people, all the time. So what I've tried to do is capture and show you when I used it in the beginning, when I used it in the middle of the few years, and then when I used it at the end. And I actually managed to find my first ever memo. I'm going to show it to you. So it was on September the 7th, 2016. Do you remember that time? So it was a while ago. And it's here. So my first ever memo about my PhD. And essentially, I just write about how I have no idea what memoing is. And so that was my first point to get across. Like, I really like grounded theory because there aren't many boxes that you get pushed in. And there is this kind of understanding of self and your research philosophy. But I like it because as long as you're justifying your choices, then the world is your oyster. You can kind of use anything. And I really love that. So the first thing I did here is then Burks and Mills in their 2011, I imagine it's called What is Grounded Theory book or something like this. I think they've got a 2023 now version. But there was an activity, you know, thinking about self, reality. So that was my first memo when I thought about what were the things that were important to me very early on. I look at it now and I think, oh, that's not very good. Oh, you know, but it doesn't matter because it was capturing the point in time and my thinking. And so it's super, super interesting to be able to look back. Then in the middle, I've kind of put an ABC point of in my middle. So this was after my first interview with someone, and a bit like Nikki, but less tidy. I kind of scribbled down my thoughts of, you know, how did it go? What I thought was good. You know, and then I had a light bulb moment. And I think it's really important when you have those moments. So previously, Nikki said he has one when he was on his bicycle, and I'm cycling in Cambridge. It's too crazy to think about anything about the taxi just not hitting you. So I don't know where I did my memoing, literally all the time, anywhere, just to write down, to capture my thoughts before I go on to the next thing. Because being part-time, I found it really difficult to work full-time and do all the other activities I had to try and jump through. So this one was this kind of realization of how I was doing my interviews and my data capturing, and I did a diagram within that. And then I realized that was actually called something. So I was really proud of myself. 2017 pride. This one is always about that challenge of when and how to use the literature. So it's very interesting to have captured my thoughts in 2020 to think of, you know, how did I progress that, and where this thought process was then, and how I actually did use the literature. It's really helpful to have seen how my thinking developed the more I read, the more data I collected, the more I integrated. So this one was quite helpful. And C is, I was just blown away by the fact that I had to make this theory. And what was a theory? And it was a model, and I couldn't figure out how to do that. So I think I just saw some models in different places where I was looking at things, and I just captured some, and I think I've said, oh, that one was interesting. So it's not really anything that it has to be one way or the other when I was memoing. It was just things that caught my attention or was part of my thinking. How do I use it? Terribly. When you look at everybody else's slides, terribly. I'm very, very scribbly. So these were my categories and codes, and I've put some color coding, and it looks like I used a bit of paper that had come already through the printer. So it was just wherever I was just using stuff. This one was some excellent brown paper. I love a bit of felt tip pens and color, and I'm trying to figure out this kind of relationship between them. And so I've obviously done this, and you could argue this is the diagramming element. But because I put it into a memo, I'm able to think about it, go back to it, articulate my thoughts. But literally, I think this one was taken when I was trying to figure out my thought process and what I was doing and trying to work through everything that was in my brain. I think I was camping when I did this. I'm not even sure what that bit of paper is. This was when I started to formulate my ideas in a better way. And as I said, I am scribbly. So I'm trying to figure out, how did my relationships of all the codes and categories come together? Why was that important at that time? What was I doing? You know, how was I working through? And then this is how it appeared in my memoing on the OneNote. Because when I was doing this diagramming, I noticed some things. And when I was looking at the athlete data, I was putting in a certain way. And when I was drawing out the national governing body, so it enabled me also to have this kind of distance from my diagramming, so I could look at it and think about it and just engage with what was in my brain because it's so overwhelming. You just feel like you're drowning in all the data that you have, and memoing allowed me that space to be able to work through all of the, I wasn't say junk, that would be rude, all of the stuff that was in my mind. I think I guess my top tips are not dissimilar to what the others have said so far. Try and keep them all in the same place, even if you do them in different formats, in different areas, or when you're shopping or when you're cycling. Try not to just leave them like on my phone or somewhere on my computer. I also had a Mac that I was using. Because I was using this OneNote, it enabled me to pull everything together in one place. And even when I was scribbling on bits of paper on the train, I could still capture that and put it where I needed it to be. And memo often. It's really, 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 really overwhelming in grounded theory because you just feel like there's so much data and so many codes, and it just helps you to sort through that and sort through how you're feeling about it as well. And there are no restrictions. Sometimes I wrote how annoyed I was with my supervisors. Sometimes I wrote about how annoyed I was with the doctoral school. Sometimes I wrote about how the data was really growing and I'd read this really cool thing, or I went to this really cool seminar. And then sometimes I'd put my diagrams in. But all of the memos I have are in one place. I finished my PhD last year, and I can go back to 2016 and show it to you. So these are my top tips. And you don't have to be neat. And also, I thought it was interesting that someone was talking about sort of transparency within your memos. Your memos are for you. How you want to show them later to people is up to you. But the memos were for me as a researcher. And yeah, I did discuss some with my supervisors, not the ones where I thought I was annoyed with them, but the ones where, you know, I needed help with their analysis or something. So I think that those are the things that I thought were important from my study. I'm sorry they were scribbly, but if you've met me, then that is the way I am. So I cannot help that. I'm always happy to help people with grounded theory. So this is my email. It's just sometimes just so overwhelming. And, you know, it's good to have a community where you can ask people, because it's really tough when your supervisors don't do it. So if anybody needs help, just reach out.
Katrina, thank you so much. It's just so refreshing to see how different people apply this this unstructured skill which we all use within grounded theory. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions or experiences they want to share following Katrina's talk?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just mindful of time. So, oh, Hilary.
I shall ask at the end, Pippa.
Okay, go for it. So we'll move straight on to Janet then to expand even more on diagramming as a method of memoing. Thank you, Janet.
Hello. So I thought that memos were about data. So I have already learnt today that they're not. So I had reflective diaries and memos. So these are my reflective diaries. They're here. There's a big pile of them. And I wrote in those from the start. And that's where I tended to write about how I felt about things. I was researching in India, so I had a lot of stuff on positionality and how dare I and all those sort of things. And they tended to go into my reflective diaries, some of which I did code actually. So my memos are mostly about my data. I realise that I don't think there is a right and wrong. I think we're picking up. But I just wanted to share some of that with you. And I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to show you a chart where I kept things, where everything ended up. And then I'm going to show you a few of my diagrams, which I felt were like this interactive way of thinking. So this, I just want to show you, oh, come on. This. So this was, I had lots of these charts. They started off looking at my codes. So I had my codes down here, focus codes as gerunds, which we know are like ing words generally. And so they're all down there. And then, so there's quite a lot. So we're not reading it, we're just looking at the pattern. Then those kind of got grouped, and I've coloured them as well into the categories as gerunds, which are on the left. But when you actually look to the right, the rest of them are all the memos. So I did a questionnaire as my final phase. So this column C here, questionnaire, linkage and memos. D, memos about the codes. And I have noted, and I'm going to note again, it is, as Katrina just said, it's a conversation with the self. It's for me, for my benefit, that my thinking about, in my case, my data. Then I had memos about the categories. Then I had memos about the concepts. I was really trying to memo. And they're like my thoughts on it, my interpretations of it. And I'm going to look at one of these in slightly more detail. I had some reflections at the end here, again, linking to positionality, about my beliefs and assumptions to how they might be influencing that interpretive process. But like Hilary was saying, we need to show we're robust and that we've thought these things through and that we're able to challenge our interpretations. So I have memos. I seem to have quite a lot of memos, actually. But I'm going to show you one in slightly more detail. And what I did with it. So I'm stopping sharing that and showing you going on to my PowerPoint. If I can manage to pull all this off, it's wonderful. So now I'm going to share that. Oh, I don't know where you are.
We're still here.
I might have just left the meeting. How are you?
Yeah.
I can't see you. I can't see how to. Oh, here we are. Sorry, I'd minimized you. I couldn't find you. So sorry. I'm a professional, really. Deep down. Okay, so here we are. So this is one memo. And I've just wanted to show you how it was. This was from February 2021. So this was 2.5 years before the end. Play from the current slide. And I've just highlighted, please don't read it all. I do like lots of colours. They don't have a particular meaning apart from that when each time I've read it, I add something, I think something else is more important. So this is on one particular category about applying clinical skills not being taught. And just looking at my beautiful circling there. So they're the bits that are like my interpretations, remembering they're for me. They could be quite assumptive. At this point, I'm going to challenge them so that's okay. So they're not allowed to learn practical skills. That seems really important. And when you actually know how this ends up, what my theory is, that's really cool that I was noticing that early on. The next one down, there's a combination of faculty and students, but the message is coming from faculty that this is not worth bothering with. That becomes one of my core category points. And that's interesting that I was starting to have that thought quite early. The next one down is the students were scared because they felt failed by a system that didn't teach them. These are significant things that I was thinking quite early on that later on fitted together. And my question here, why are they not taught? When I got to theoretical integration, that was absolutely key. Why is this then? We found this here, they're not taught. That's the process. Why not? I won't do the others, but I think it's interesting that the memos actually are the foundation for your theoretical integration later on. So these are the key things that I think about it. It is an interpretive conversation with the self. I have that written above my desk. A memo is an interpretive conversation with self, not with anyone else. You might share them, but it's mainly about self. Corbyn and Strauss said that they were cumulative. That means what you think in 2016, like Katrina, might be different to what she thought in 2023. That's okay. That's good. It's a progressive thing. It's an evolving and dynamic process. Absolutely. And again, it's an interactive space for conversing with the self. This is where you have these conversations in your head. So I wanted to just show you a few of how mine progressed, really. Early on, I drew these sort of things, which then later became this sort of thing. This never got to the final end. This was quite early on. This was in code, DNA. That's, but it's for me, so that's okay. You can present them, but you don't have to. This is for me thinking, how does that link to that? And I do diagram as a form of memoing. It seems to be something I've evolved into. This was one I did early on and then shared with some interns, some students, to ask what they thought. So it was interactive, and I use PowerPoint to do my diagramming stroke memoing. I haven't got time to talk you through it all, but these are things I shared with the students.
Just to let you know, Janet, we've only got probably about 1 minute left.
I'll just stop then, because
No,
I've got
keep going
loads
for a
more
bit.
to show you. Okay, very good. So I'll go quite quickly. This was the process that I was finding. This is what seems significant. And this system and the culture that were blocking students' learning was significant to the people I talked with. I shared it with them. I shared my memos with the people, and then it progressed. It progressed here: systemic, social, cultural factors. Shall I finish with this one? This is about the moving head. So there is more that I wanted to share, but I seem to have run out of time. So this I still think is a memo, because it's still me looking at the process. It's not the final theory. But I'll talk you through this one, then I'll stop. So this is about some students who engage or don't engage in education. And that's influenced by what they want, their goals, and the motives that lead them to those goals. Some students want to engage with patients. They want to understand the mind. They want to communicate. They want to care. Understanding is most important. Remember, this is for me, my thinking. This is what I think is important. They like the mind and they ask questions. Go back to data. Some students don't engage at all. They aim for marks, for ranking, for a good degree, a good job. Their mind is very much on their qualifications and post-graduation and status. I can send you a link to this in a slower version if you wish. And linking in back to the data, psychiatry's got a few marks and they don't engage. There's nothing in it for me. These are the most significant people, however, the ones that have just appeared at the bottom. These people also want to get their qualification, care about patients to a degree, and they attend despite knowing there's few marks. So why is that? My question to myself, my conversation with myself. They want skills. That's their priority. They want to learn to help people. They go to psychiatry. At the top there, it says it's got a few marks and no skills. So this is what happens. They become disengagers. I'll do that again because it's exciting. They switch sides. This is what I needed to capture in my memo, in my diagram. Some people start as one thing and move to something else. The disengagers become not engagers because of the system. They say faculty are too pressured to teach. Do you remember that goes back to that memo, the written one? And students, they need to prioritize. They say things like, we used to care, but they didn't teach us. The system made us this way. Now that's where that one's stopping. So if we've run out of time, I'll stop. But the why of that is even more important. And I started to think with diagrams, with drawings, more so about why that might be. But I absolutely think in this way. I think diagrammatically, and I play about with squares on PowerPoints for fun, which is an odd thing to do, but it helps me think.
That's fascinating, Janet. Thank you so much. And certainly that last slide where you're bringing in the written as well into the diagrams too. I think, I don't know whether other people might think the same, but memoing in my head is, I think when I started was all about written, and right from Hillary's get-go of actually, it can be all sorts of creative ways that fits best with you. Thanks, Katrina. Any questions for any of our speakers before we tie up? Alexandra.
Hi, thank you. And thanks everyone. I'm not entirely sure who this question is for, but I just wondered whether anyone had any thoughts on kind of that process where you kind of start writing or start scribbling or start doing whatever you're doing, and then that kind of prompts more thoughts and it kind of becomes a bit more of a cycle. Because I think a lot of the guidance I'd seen was kind of wait till some inspiration comes and then write it down, which is great, but I feel like I've started finding that even if I'm not, or I'm just feeling vaguely confused, writing at that point kind of sparks more thoughts. And yeah, whether any of you found something similar, and then any points where then it's particularly helpful to start writing and just see what happens, or drawing. I hope that makes sense as a question.
Yeah, Nikki.
Makes perfect sense. And the only thing you can do at that given point in time is down the rabbit hole you go. and you keep working and thinking and writing and scribbling until it's out your brain, because if you stop or you wait, it's going to get lost. And sometimes that is really annoying because it keeps you awake at night. But get it out your head, record it somewhere, and then you can always deal with it later. But yes, grounded theory and rabbit holes are, yeah, dangerous, but very good. Rabbit holes are good because they give you insight, and suddenly you realize that things aren't as they might seem in your data. So if it happens, just keep doing it and tell people they have to wait whatever they want from you.
Thanks, Nikki.
I'll give that a go.
I think the message is just embrace that chaos. It'll take you somewhere. that rabbit warren, you'll pop out somewhere eventually, find the daylight. Thank you all very much, and my chairing has been appalling because we're over time, so thank you very much for sharing your time with us. It's been fascinating, excellent speakers. I suppose just before we wrap up, just thinking about what's next on the horizon. So on the 23rd of April, we've got the Creative Methods Seminar coming up, and that will be an online event. Nikki, is that going to be promoted if it hasn't already? Will it be sent around?
Advertising for that will start this afternoon, and registrations will start from next week.
Great. And then if you haven't heard of the Scottish Grounded Theory Symposium, please do look it up. They have a symposium that's in June, on the 14th of June. So very well worth taking part in that, listening in or taking part. Yeah, it will be a really good event. And obviously we'll have another one of these set up at some point soon. We haven't got a date in the diary, but as I'm aware that we've overrun, if you have particular topics that you would like to be covered in our next session, please do drop it into the chat, and then we can pick it up from there and start to build our next online seminar, because it will be great to see you all back and have another fruitful discussion. And of course, as you've seen today, we're a very friendly group, so please do also step forwards and volunteer to share your experiences as our speakers have done today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Pippa.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Good to see everyone.
Yeah, thank
Take
you.
care. Bye bye.
Nice to
Thank
see
you.
you. Bye.
Thanks.